Welcome back to Speducation. I am your host, Brandon Reed. And as always, if this is your first time to the channel, a special welcome to you. Well, we have a new week and a new lesson. So without further ado, let's dive right in. Today's lesson, OHI, Other Health Impairment, the Special Education Loophole. Now, you're probably wondering, well, wait a second, what is a special education loophole and why is OHI that? Well, the reason why OHI is that is because there are a lot of different disabilities that fall within the OHI, other health impairment category. And the reason for that, well, there are a lot of reasons really, but I'm going to give you a basic overview of why OHI is used as kind of a legal loophole for parents that want to get services for their children. OHI, as defined by IDEA, states that other health impairment means having limited strength, vitality, or alertness, including a heightened alertness to environmental stimuli that results in limited alertness with respect to the educational environment. That is due to chronic or acute health problems, such as asthma, attention deficit disorder, or attention deficit hyperactive disorder, diabetes, epilepsy, a heart condition, hemophilia, lead poisoning, leukemia, nephritis, rheumatic fever, sickle cell anemia, and Tourette's syndrome, and adversely affects a child's educational performance. So as you can see, there are a lot of disabilities that fall within the OHI category. Now, you may have noticed that it said ADD and ADHD, and you're probably thinking, well, if they have ADD and ADHD, why is it that my child who has ADD doesn't qualify for special ed? Well, it all comes down to that second category, which is it has to adversely impact the student's education. Now, all of those disabilities have their own challenges, but if they don't adversely affect the child's education, then they don't necessarily qualify for an IEP. They may qualify for a 504, but not necessarily an IEP. So that's why when you have case conferences to determine the eligibility, they have to look at a lot of different factors. They have to collect a lot of different data in order to determine, is this disability going to affect this child? And if the case conference committee feels that they're on that bubble, that yes, an IEP might help, but then again, it may not necessarily help, special ed teachers can have a tendency to say, you know what? I think it's enough that we can give him an IEP. But again, that's a case conference committee decision. In regards to ADD and ADHD, the CDC reports millions of U.S. children have been diagnosed with ADHD. An estimated 7 million, 11.4% of U.S. children aged 3 to 17 years have ever been diagnosed with ADHD, according to a national survey of parents using data from 2022, November 19th, 2024. So to give some perspective on those numbers, the number of people that live in the state of Indiana is a little over 6 million. So if you were to put all of those 7 million children in the state of Indiana and then give them a special education IEP, you're basically giving the entire state of Indiana an IEP. Okay, that's a lot of children, and that can put a strain on the system. Now, those 7 million children, obviously, not all of them live in Indiana. They live all across the nation. But still, special ed teachers have to narrow down what qualifies and what doesn't. And for ADD and ADHD, well, sometimes a simple pill can help. Medication can help them focus. Sometimes the medication doesn't always work, but they do slightly well in the classroom. They just need some extra time or maybe some extra support. And in that case, a 504 would be helpful. But for those individuals that the ADD or ADHD is so severe that even with medication and additional support, it's not helping them, they need additional support on top of all of that. That's where an IEP comes in. So even though OHI is a special education loophole for individuals with ADD and ADHD, it's not like you have it, you're automatically going to have an IEP. You have to meet certain criteria. And what about the other disabilities? Asthma, diabetes, epilepsy, heart condition, hemophilia, lead poisoning, leukemia, nephritis, rheumatic fever, sickle cell anemia, and Tourette syndrome? Well, for those disabilities, they can have their own challenges. But again, it doesn't necessarily mean that you wouldn't necessarily qualify for an IEP. Much like with ADD and ADHD, if there's medication that can help relieve some of those symptoms and help them focus, then they don't necessarily need an IEP. But if the medication doesn't quite help enough, they might qualify for a 504. But again, if that isn't enough and they need more direct support, then they would qualify for an IEP. But all of this has to be covered in a case conference committee, and it has to be a case conference committee decision. So even though you may have one of these disabilities or your child has one of these disabilities, it doesn't necessarily mean that they would qualify. But if they did qualify, they would most likely be placed under the category of OHI, other health impairment. And that brings us to the end of today's video. So if you liked what you saw, you're new to the channel, or you learned something new, please click that like button. And if you want updates on future videos, feel free to click the subscribe button and ring the bell for updates on future videos. And as always, if you have any questions about anything that you saw today, or you have a specific question about special ed that you're not quite sure how to ask or what the answer might be, please drop a line in the comments section and I'd be happy to help. And until next time, class dismissed.